Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thanks again for joining, everyone. My name's Angie Furman, and I'm the River Training Center Coordinator for River Management Society, joining you today from Southwestern Oregon. And today we are doing a training session on wild and scenic river values. This is the third in our 6-part series that we've got going on. So thank you for those who are coming back, those who are new. Just a few slides before we get started and have some information shared by John Campbell and Liz Townley, both from the Forest Service. So you'll be hearing from them in a minute, but I just wanted to go through a few quick things. First off, for those who might not be familiar, RMS is a national nonprofit, and our mission is to support professionals who study, protect, and manage North America's rivers. So we do this through a variety of ways that you can see there on the screen. For our members, we host training workshops such as this, have a lot of networking opportunities like our River Management Symposium that we just finished up a couple weeks ago now in San Antonio, and our next one's going to be in Southern Oregon in 2025. We support the River Studies and Leadership Certificate and have a lot of great opportunities and resources like job boards and things like that. So again, would love to hear who's joining us. You can click on that chat button and introduce yourself. Just want to set a couple expectations today. We are going to be doing some more interactive exercises. So we will expect you to participate. We will do some breakout room stuff. Again, please use that chat there. We might do some collective note taking. And if we do, we'll share that link with you. I'm not sure if we're going to do that today, but we've got it on backup just in case. Just a couple agreements for today's session. Like I mentioned, this is going to be fairly interactive at parts. So we encourage you to be here. Also, we've got a lot of experts in this room, so please share. This is a space for us to come together, share our knowledge with each other. We encourage you to keep your camera on if possible. It's nice to see other faces in the room, especially when we're in breakout groups. Just can make things a little bit more personal. I mentioned the chat before, just one more time. One of my favorite things that you've heard me mention before, if you've been to this series already, is it's okay to be raggedy. We're thinking through things together. And also, what's true today might be different tomorrow. So as we are getting started here, I just wanted to review our purpose today is to come together to learn about outstandingly remarkable values, but also the other river values that are identified in the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, and kind of explore them, mention the importance of them and documenting them, so we can manage to protect and enhance them. So we're going to start off by going into some breakout groups. And in these breakout groups, going to have everyone introduce themselves and just share what you already know about wild and scenic river values, maybe how they've been important in your work or in your life. Setting up the breakout groups now. And so we're going to go in, spend about 5-6 minutes in these breakout groups. And I'm going to send you off now. You shouldn't have to do anything. But again, introduce yourselves and then chat a little bit about what you already know about wild and scenic river values.
Hey, Angie.
Hello, I just joined. I'm joining a bit late, so I missed the breakout group prompt.
Yeah, me too. Well, I got
Me
booted.
Okay,
I think Angie will send us somewhere shortly, or we'll just hang out here and
okay.
All right. For those who are maybe just joining, we're just coming back from some breakout groups. People will be coming back in here in a minute. All right, I think just here we go. People are starting to roll back in. All right, I think everyone is back. There's some good dialogue in the group I was in. I hope everyone had a chance to introduce themselves and share a little bit about some of what they know about wild and scenic river values and how they apply to their lives, or maybe some questions that they might have and that we can answer over the next little bit. So with that, I am going to go ahead and pass it over to you, Liz, to introduce yourself and take it from there.
Cool. Thanks, Angie. Yeah, so my name's Liz Townley, and I'm the National Wilderness and Wild and Scenic Rivers Planner for the Washington office of the Forest Service. I'm coming to you today from Salmon, Idaho, just outside Salmon, actually. Yeah, thanks for being here. I'm encouraged to see the participation and this really cool webinar series that Angie has put on. And I look forward to attending future sessions as well. So, yeah, I see some familiar faces in the room, and I apologize if this is maybe 101 level information for some of you that might already know this. And I'm happy to go into like as much detail as folks want to. So I was kind of thinking about this and, you know, looking at river values. And I guess the question is like, how do we manage a wild and scenic river? How do we talk about resources of a wild and scenic river? How do we identify what's important to protect and enhance, to monitor? So river values really create this triple bottom line of sorts for implementation of the Wild and Scenic River Act. So far as these are, you know, the basis for management of a wild and scenic river. So river values are comprised of three things: one, free flowing water, two, water quality, and three, outstandingly remarkable values, or commonly referred to as river values. If I'm doing a presentation like this and Steve's here, he always says, you know, I don't know what they were thinking with this like double superlative for outstandingly remarkable values, but it is what it is. And this is kind of what we're stuck with. So next slide, please. So what does it mean to protect and enhance these river values? So section 10A of the Act directs that every wild and scenic river should protect and enhance the values of the river for which it was designated, without limiting other uses that do not substantially interfere with public use and enjoyment of these values. So protect in this sense is defined by documenting and eliminating adverse impacts on river values. So this would be, again, free flow, water quality, and ORVs. And this includes activities that were present at the time of designation. So enhanced in this context is defined by seeking opportunities to improve conditions. Each wild and scenic river administering agency must, based on best available scientific information and reasoned professional judgment, ensure that existing values are protected and, to the extent practical, enhanced. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about free flowing and water quality, and then I'll hand it over to John and he'll provide much more context around ORVs. So as one of the three primary river values identified for protection, understanding what is considered free flowing is crucial, obviously, to wild and scenic river study and management. It is not, as you might first presume, that it's the same as naturally flowing or flowing in a manner unimpacted by human activity. Rather, free flowing is a condition, which is a pretty important concept that comes directly from Section 16B of the Act, where it defines free flowing as existing or flowing in a natural condition without impoundment, diversion, straightening, riprapping, or other modification of the waterway. So that said, the existence of low dams, diversion works, and other minor structures at the time any river is proposed for inclusion does not automatically disqualify a river. So a free-flowing river then is largely unaffected by human-made changes to its flow and connectivity. Water, silt, and other natural materials can move along the river unobstructed. Migratory fish and other animals and other fish can swim up and downstream at will. This can be a bit of a nuanced conversation to understand. So I definitely suggest going to rivers.gov or other resources to find more about this, but there is quite a bit of information out there on rivers.gov. Next slide, please. So water quality is another river value identified for protection in Section 1B of the Act. And again, Section 1B states that selected rivers shall be preserved in their free-flowing condition to protect the quality of the rivers. So while water quality is a fundamental value of wild and scenic rivers and has implications for classification, a river does not need to possess high water quality to be included in the national system. However, once a river is designated, water quality becomes one of the three central river values under the Wild and Scenic River Act that the managing agencies must work to protect and enhance. So a little bit more information here. At the time of the passage of the Act in 1968, Section 12C delegated the authority for protecting water quality to state water pollution control agencies. But with the creation of the EPA and the Clean Water Act in the early 1970s, Section 12C was amended and now directs wild and scenic river managing agencies to cooperate with the EPA and related state agencies to identify and address water quality issues. So the intent here being that the managing agencies work in a collaborative role with state agencies and the EPA to achieve water quality objectives. So a few fun facts that I'll leave you with regarding water quality is the Forest Service manages the largest single source of water in the United States. More than 60 million Americans rely on drinking water that originated on the national forests and grasslands. And my personal favorite, 1 out of 10 people can trace their drinking water source back to a designated wild and scenic river. With that, I will pass it over to John to talk more about ORVs.
Thanks, Liz. John, yeah, if you want to start by introducing yourself. I did see Monica's question in the chat, but I think maybe after we go through and talk a little bit more about ORVs, then we can come back to that.
Okay, I was going to double check on that. I saw the question as well. So, hey everyone, my name is John Campbell. I am the Southern Region of the Forest Service Wilderness and Wild and Scenic River Program Manager. I've been in this position for about 5 years and in multiple positions in Georgia and Utah for about 15 years before that. As I was telling our breakout group that I didn't manage a single wild and scenic river resource the first about 16 years of my career. So it's definitely been a learning process for me these last 5. And in some ways, this is the culmination of that, is pushing myself to teach others about the little things that I've learned. And I rely on what Angie says at the beginning too. There's lots of experts on this call, and we're I hope we can have conversations that continue to learn. Like I just learned from Liz that 1 out of every 10 American can trace their water to a wild and scenic river. I didn't know that. So we'll kick off with the third value. Next slide, please, Liz. Which is outstandingly remarkable values, or ORVs. You're going to hear that a lot over the next 20 to 30 minutes or so. So Section 1B of the Act identifies the river-related values which qualify as an ORV. They include scenic, recreational, geologic, fish, wildlife, historic, cultural, or other similar values. The category called other similar values is not defined in the Act. However, it's been interpreted to include resources such as botany, hydrology, paleontology, heritage, and ecology. Next slide, please. And I'm going to go through a few of these a little more in depth, just so we kind of have a better understanding of what each of these means. So Liz, you can kind of click through those. Excuse me, not Liz, Angie, you can click through those as I go. So first is scenic. Just because a stream corridor is pretty does not mean it is an ORV. Remember, scenery must be river related. For example, mountains in the distance may be scenic and are common, but are not likely to be river related in many cases. In contrast, say colorful canyon walls carved by the river could be considered a river related scenic value. You really have to take into account the landscape elements of landform, vegetation, water, color, and some other factors that may result in the designation of an ORV. The next one is recreation. So recreational opportunities within the river corridor should have the potential to attract visitors from throughout or beyond the region of comparison, or should be unique or rare within the region. Most people think of the recreation ORV as rafting or kayaking, but river-related ORVs can also include sightseeing, wildlife observation, camping, photography, hiking, fishing, hunting, and other types of boating, or combination of those activities and experiences. You just always have to remember it has to be river-related, not just something that is in the area or can happen in a particular area, but also happens away from the river in the particular region. So one good example of a recreational ORV is the Maine salmon in Idaho. What makes the recreational experience unique is the 80 miles of free-flowing river in the heart of the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness. It provides a multi-day trip, camping on large sandy beaches with a mix of challenging rapids, but also stuff that's family friendly. So despite this being in the same region of comparison for the Middle Fork and Lower Salmon, they all have recreation ORVs, but for different reasons. And we'll talk about more why those descriptions are more important a little bit later. One more example I wanted to mention was from my neck of the woods, so to speak, is the Red River in Kentucky. Its ORV is related around hiking, backcountry camping, kayaking, and canoeing. An exceptional experience here is related to the over 100 natural sandstones in the, natural sandstone arches in the Red River Gorge. Some say it's the largest concentration east of the Mississippi. There are also over 600 known rock shelters along the Red River that users can experience. Obviously, some pretty sensitive resources there, but that's what people go there to experience. That's what makes recreating in that particular area along that particular river so important. Up next is geology. This is where the river area contains one or more examples of a geologic feature, process, or phenomenon that is unique or rare within the region of comparison. They may represent a rare combination of geological features such as erosional, volcanic, glacial, or another geologic feature. All right, next up is fish. Fish values include either indigenous fish populations or habitat or a combination of those river-related conditions. So for populations, the river or the river corridor is nationally or regionally an important producer of indigenous and or anadromous fish species. Of particular significance is the presence of wild stocks, threatened, endangered, or sensitive species. Diversity of species could also in itself lead to a determination of an ORV. Habitat is somewhat similar, provides exceptionally high quality habitat for fish species indigenous to in the region of comparison. There is significant importance put on wild stocks, threatened, endangered, or sensitive species. Diversity of habitat could also be an important consideration. Next is wildlife. Wildlife values include either terrestrial or aquatic wildlife populations or habitats, or a combination of those. The descriptions for these mimic those for fish, with a focus on threatened, endangered, or sensitive species, with the important stipulation that they must be dependent on the river environment. I've been a part of a couple of CRMP processes where you really can get away from the river in a lot of these discussions, especially with wildlife, where wildlife move a whole lot. There's not, there are some that definitely are dependent on the river itself, but others that just use it. And you got to make that distinction when you're making a determination of an ORV. Next one is cultural. So the river or the area within the river corridor contains rare or outstanding examples of historic or prehistoric locations of human activity, occupation, or use, including locations of traditional cultural or religious importance to specific social or cultural groups. Waterways have been important to people throughout history, not a big groundbreaking statement there. So cultural river values can be found across the Wild and Scenic River system, ranging from granaries, points and flakes, to pictographs and petroglyphs. It's another one of those ones where I know we've talked about is there's a history to every river. You've got to make sure that it rises to some of these high standards to make it an ORV. And that happens pretty often on some rivers. Let's see, and the final one, kind of the catch-all, is other. While no specific national evaluation guidelines have been developed for other similar value category, assessments of additional river-related values consistent with guidance may be developed. Those are included but not limited to, like I mentioned earlier, hydrology, paleontology, botany, climate refugia, ecology, dark skies, and we even have a river that has a literary ORV. Please don't ask me which one that is, because I searched and could not find it. I bet Liz knows what it is, but I didn't have time. I was practicing and I was like, I should find out what that is before I have it in my script, and I couldn't find it. So if you know it, pop it in the chat. And we'll see if anyone comes up with the answer. Until then, we'll keep moving on with the slides. So why do we identify ORVs? Well, first of all, because we have to. The Act says we do, it's the law. But each river is different. And in order to protect and enhance those ORVs, which is our other legal standard, we need to know where they are and develop specific site plans to manage them. Once we identify those, ORVs can be used to guide future management actions, develop Wild and Scenic River corridor boundaries, serve as a baseline for monitoring, inform user capacities and Federal Reserve water rights processes, and central to evaluating potential adverse impacts of proposed water resource projects, i.e. Section 7, which I believe Monica asked us a question about. So maybe we'll come full circle to that here in just a little bit. And let's see, next slide, please, Angie. Oh, did it go, or it might have just paused on my end? I'll keep moving here. Oh, can everyone see that one? Okay. So just another reminder, ORVs must be river related, and they owe their existence to the presence of the river. They contribute substantially to the function of the river ecosystem and other networks like recreation or cultural resources. You can see a few examples down below. We've been through these before. Those are all of the things that can be river related. Let's see, next slide, please, Angie. All right, we're going to take another little quick break here for some interaction to hear about some of the rivers that y'all work and recreate on. Let's see, I think Angie's going to put up oh no, we're going to do it in the chat. That's what I forgot. We're going to do this in the chat. Is just list a river that you either work on, you've recreated on, or you know something about, and maybe list one of its ORVs and tell us what makes it so special. You know, it's so-and-so river. I'll use mine as an example here on the slide. I picked the Chattooga River for recreation, and because of the whitewater rafting, world-class whitewater rafting. You know, this is an amazing resource, not only locally, but it's recognized worldwide for its pretty unique resources. This is me going down one of the rapids there early on. Luckily, this one was for work. I've been down a couple times for work, and then took my kids down 2 summers ago, and they had an absolute blast. Want to go down? For those that know the Chattooga River, Bull Sluice, I took my 10 and 8-year-old down Bull Sluice Rapid, and they loved every minute of it. So it's a pretty cool place. But yeah, I wanted to break up you guys listening to me talk for a few minutes. So just you know, in the next couple of minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, just throw some information about a river and an ORV or something you know into the chat so that we can just have a conversation about a few of those.
And I didn't see anyone type in the answer to the literary ORV. I do have the answer.
You do? I should have asked you when we got on early.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I would have never gotten that one.
John, I had to ask Steve.
I had to ask Steve. For those that don't, we keep referencing Steve. Steve is the National Wild and Scenic River Program Manager for the Forest Service, and kind of the go-to for us for all things wild and scenic river.
So I see a couple people have typed into the chat, some Noah's with the Merced River, or typed in about the Merced River. That's got some scenic and recreational values. Sarah mentioned that the East Fork Jemez in the Santa Fe National Forest has an ecology ORV, mostly tied to 2 rare endemic plant species that exist in the corridor. Fred with Great Egg Harbor River. I named after the abundance of birds, which became an ORV. That's a new fact for me. I didn't realize
cool.
that's where it got its name. John Day River, ORV is fish for summer Columbia steelhead. The Verde. Oh, things are coming in. Historic and cultural. Niobrara, scenic, geology, cultural. The Kern. Awesome. These are some great examples.
Yeah, I agree.
And I know that there's a team of people who are working on going through all the information on rivers.gov and trying to come up with like a list of ORVs for a lot of the different rivers. So if you joined us for our January session, we went to rivers.gov and looked at some of the wild and scenic rivers, which I encourage you to do if you haven't ever. And I don't know when, but little by little, there's going to be, they're working on ORV descriptions. I know I looked up a river yesterday for some project, and it had a nice little paragraph on each ORV for that river. I see. I see we've got a couple questions. Keep putting your questions that come up. I think once we finish John's presentation, we'll touch on some of those questions, if that is a good time to do that. Unless you want to do that now, John, otherwise we can continue on.
We can continue on. Sorry, I stepped away for a minute. I had prepared everything. My daughter was getting off the bus and I forgot to open the garage door because it's windy and cold here. So I had to run downstairs and open the garage door when our bus got here.
You're fast. You're fast, John.
Okay. So what was the question? And we can probably come back to it during the question section if you want to.
Yeah, we'll just come back to it during the question section.
Okay, sorry about that. All right, moving on here. Let's see. So how do we determine ORVs? Prior to congressional designations, most federal agencies go through eligibility evaluations of some kind. I'm used to a forest plan revision with the Forest Service, but I know there are similar processes with the other Department of Interior agencies. There's a few initial criteria. Obviously, one, they must be free-flowing and they must possess at least one ORV. And then those evaluations and determinations are embedded in their forest plans or the equivalent with the DOI agencies. They can also be determined through standalone analysis through CRMP development. This is a situation where Congress passes a law that says you now have a wild and scenic river, but they may have not identified any of the ORVs in the enabling legislation. So you gotta kind of start from scratch. Or oftentimes, or sometimes, I think depends throughout time, but the enabling legislation sometimes will give you a head start and give you some background on why the river is designated, or they might specifically state what some of the ORVs are. And then as you go through your comprehensive river management plan development, you'll use that and either go with it, you'll build on it, you'll maybe alter it a little bit. As long as you're within the spirit of the legislation, you'll take what you have and develop your plan to determine what the ORVs are for the river. Next slide. So just a little more on the criteria here. You've heard me talk about river related. That's very important for the ORVs. Owe their existence to the presence of the river, and they substantially contribute to the function of the river ecosystem. Two more things though that we're going to talk about. One is unique, rare, or exemplary. And then we're going to talk about the region of comparison. Next slide. Sorry, I've got a delay on my end. I don't know if you're getting it on your end, but I'm kind of following the slides here. So the first one is unique, rare, or exemplary. These set a very high standard. These aren't words you just throw around every day. We all work in and around some pretty amazing and special resources. ORVs should represent some of the most special, the highest tier of those particular resources. So unique is obviously one of a kind, it's unequaled. The only classified rapid in a region, sole habitat for a listed species. Rare being uncommon, unusual, or infrequently occurring. And then exemplary, serving as a model, the best of its kind. Like I said earlier, these are the most special type resources that we have. And that's kind of a discerning characteristic of an ORV versus, you know, the lots of the standard things that we manage. So let's see, next slide, please. Second part of that definition is the region of comparison. This is identified by a local interdisciplinary team that has knowledge of the area and the local resources, and it's done for each ORV category. It varies by river, but is scaled to best fit the river being evaluated. I've only been a part of the development of two CRMPs where we're talking about the ORVs, and I will say the region of comparison can get difficult sometimes as to how small or how large you want to have that and what's the proper comparison. And it does vary across a lot of those ORVs. So next slide, please. So here's some examples of the resource-specific comparative regions. Think of recreation as an ORV. You're going to think of the population served. You can use lots of visitation data to see what level of percentage people come from versus, obviously people come from around the country and around the world to many of these places, but there's a core user group in a particular area. Cultural, you could look at the historical area occupied by that culture at some point in time as the area you want to look at and compare resources to. Looking at endangered species, you could look at where is the habitat or critical range for that particular species, and then compare the resources in the corridor to everything else in that particular area. The region of comparison can be, but does not need to be the same for each river-related value. That's, I think, pretty important and is based upon the different types of resources that you're looking at. Ultimately, on region of comparison, what's most important is that the region identified serves as a meaningful comparative reference point and contributes to the justification of the ORV. Justification is a good little segue into the next slide here, on the next couple of slides, I guess, which starts talking about documentation. So ORV determinations. The process will vary somewhat according to the unique needs and attributes associated with the specific river resources. It's very important that all of your stakeholders, tribal, federal, state, local, public, both the ones that support you and the ones that are maybe your adversaries sometimes, are all involved in the determination of ORVs. As before, this can be through your forest plan or other plan, land management planning processes, or this is going to happen through your comprehensive river management plan development. But the public involvement is an important component of making those determinations and having their input. Next slide. All right, Angie, let's see. I'm just you keep clicking and I'll keep talking. We'll see how fast this is delayed. Folks, this is a little flow chart, a very simplified flow chart. Let's see here. So is the resource present in the river? No. Your work is done. Short day at the office. Yes. And then you ask yourself the next question: is the resource river related, or does it need the river corridor to exist? The answer is no. Once again, you've got a little bit shorter of a day. It's not likely to be an ORV, and you'll document why. The answer is yes. You're going to determine if it's unique, rare, or exemplary within that region of comparison. All these criteria you set up prior to making your determination. The answer to that third question is no. Unlikely to be an ORV, and document and findings. If it's a yes, the resource is an ORV. You're going to go through and make sure you document everything that got you to this point. Why it's river related, why it's unique or rare. Talk about the resource of comparison. You're going to talk about all the resources that you compared it to, all those types of things. And then as an additional step, you're going to ask if this ORV is flow or water quality dependent. If it's no, you just don't have that component of your documentation. And if it's yes, you're going to add that to your list of documentation, list for your documentation for your determination. that worked better than I thought it was going to with the delay on the slides. Thank you. All right, so writing ORVs, why is this important? Why is documentation important? Let's say someone picks up your river value report or your CRMP 10 years from now. You spend a year or longer going through an interdisciplinary collaborative process with the public and stakeholders and other governments, where you discussed river values and hashed out all these details, identified specific features that create the basis for an ORV. And then someone goes to pick it up and they don't know how you arrived at your answers. It's so important to understand how you got there, because things change over time. I think we definitely know that things are changing quickly. So if you do not document the significance of some of the values, they may not be understood. They could be lost over time. It can alter the management of the river. It can impact monitoring efforts that have been done over time. The associated outcomes can be poor management or missed opportunities. A rule of thumb when documenting, determining ORVs is more is better. More information, the better. I might not be a good ORV writer. I've never written one before, but I'm generally pretty brief and concise. So I'd have to learn to really explore more and put more on paper as to why an ORV has been determined. Next slide. All right, desired conditions. So writing and documenting good ORVs is very important, but it also provides a basis for developing desired future conditions. Desired conditions is a pretty specific planning term, often used in planning processes, but is also used in more general sense to manage any natural resource. Simply put, desired conditions identify what the future conditions should be for a particular resource, in this case, a wild and scenic river. These are goal statements or objectives, and should be specific enough that they paint a picture of what managers and stakeholders desire the river or resource to look like in the future. And these are generally contained in your comprehensive river management plan. But I think as you're going through the process of identifying, documenting, determining ORVs, you're going to be thinking about these resources in a way as what they looked like in the past, what you want them to look like in the future, and it's important to have that written out at a single instance in time, so that, like I said, in 10, 20 years, when someone picks up your work, they're going to understand where you're coming from. I find it fascinating to look at some CRMPs. Most of the CRMPs of the rivers that I manage are anywhere from the 70s to the 90s. We don't have a lot of new ones, and the new ones have this great format, and it's in today's terms and language, but it's also great to look at the old documents and understand where they were trying to go to, because when you redo one of those documents, you use the old ones quite substantially to base a lot of your future decisions on. So it's just important to write all that type of stuff. So I think that's next slide into either activity or questions, Angie.
Yeah, I think now's a good time to pause and do some questions. So a little time for you all to think about any questions that you might have. I do want to go back and touch on a couple questions that were asked in the chat. And let me see. Monica had asked, how are, quote, significant values managed differently than ORVs when referring solely to the Wild Scenic Rivers Act and not just the direction of a river management plan? For example, would significant values need to be part of a Section 7 determination, or would the agency only be required to focus on ORVs?
Monica, I'll maybe, I guess, turn your question back into a question a little bit, is that in the context of the Wild and Scenic River Act, I haven't used the term significant values. I mean, I know a lot of the resources that we manage in our agencies, there's significant, and there's all kinds of, I guess, labels put on the resources that we manage, but I haven't seen the word significant used as maybe a lower tier than outstandingly remarkable values in the context of wild and scenic rivers. If you have a specific example, I might be able to go a little bit deeper than that. If you're willing to jump into conversation.
Sure, I'll jump in there. And I think the answer to the question is no. So like in our management plan on the John Day River, we have the congressionally designated ORVs, and then we have the ORVs that the managing agency decided were ORVs, but then we also have a couple of significant ORVs. And I think that's something that used to be done a long time ago. And when we were doing Section 7 determinations, it seemed like we only had to really focus on the designated or on the ORVs themselves and not the significant. It seems like, yes, we should manage so that the significant values are also protected and enhanced or not degraded. But it seemed like we didn't really need to bring it into the documentation. So it was kind of an off the wall question, but I was just kind of curious if you had heard of it or had any experience with it.
It sounds like during maybe the analysis or the plan development, there were some special resources that just didn't quite rise up to being an ORV, but they were included in your plan, which then I'm kind of making the assumption that then they are not held to the same legal standard through Section 7 as the ORVs are, to where they can't have there's a non-degradation or protect and enhance clause for the ORVs, and maybe not the same for a significant value.
Okay, thanks, Jen.
Yeah.
All right, and then another question that I saw come in, Bud asked if hydrology, and then in parentheses, WQ, which I'm assuming is water quality, can be, so if hydrology, water quality, can be an ORV, what's the standard? And maybe, I think it might be worth noting that, so we've got kind of water quality separate as a value. There's kind of like this umbrella, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, that there's these river values, which include water quality, free flow, and the outstandingly remarkable values. And then under that third bullet point, there's the outstandingly remarkable values, which can include hydrology. But would love to hear Liz or John or anyone else, if that's right. And then also, what is the standard, and if that's the standard of the date of designation or whatnot?
I would think manatees under a wildlife heading could certainly be an ORV. Just they're a very unique resource, and really the only one in the entire United States that I'm aware of type of situation. But then and then maybe it would either be hydrology, and I'm not a hydrologist, so I know hydrology is an ORV, but then the wildlife habitat or a combination with the manatees can also be an ORV. The springs, provide a pretty special habitat for manatees that I know is highly dependent on water quality. But as a recreation management, as a guy having recreation management background, we're getting into things with hydrology and wildlife and things that aren't my level of expertise or my subject matter expertise. But I think they all could be, or they could be rolled into one in a unique way. I kind of think it depends on how the interdisciplinary team decides to approach them all. And this is not maybe a direct correlation as I prepared for this, is, fish can be an outstanding an ORV, but fishing may not be, and vice versa. So sometimes they don't line up either. Just because you have great fishing doesn't mean that that's a great recreational opportunity, if that makes sense. Not a direct correlation there, but that made me think of that particular example.
I had a quick question.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, Ben Fowler, Clemson PhD student. Thanks y'all so much for putting this on. So my question is there, so if you're on rivers.gov, there's a lot of CRMPs to kind of pour through if you're interested in doing that kind of thing. Is there a CRMP that is exemplary or one that should definitely be looked at as a template for how to do one? There might be some biased answers in the group, but I was just curious.
I can probably answer that, Ben. Working on CRMPs is kind of my jam. I mean, maybe not by choice, but it's what I do every day, usually. So, and it is by choice. What am I saying? So, I mean, I don't think that there's like a gold standard to hold up, and that's difficult for someone like myself to say, but it's because every river is just so different and unique. And so there might be a really excellent river values report associated with one river, but maybe their user capacity is lacking a few things because they don't have a lot of people, or maybe there's a river that has this really robust capacity analysis because recreation use is super important, but maybe they're lacking in, you know, another required component. I will say that as an agency, we've, since about 2016, we started getting additional funds to support forests. And since that time, we've invested, you know, millions of dollars into CRMPs, and they've gotten so much better, including hiring my position to help kind of oversee and help out with these projects. So I've got, you know, 5 that I send out to people as, here's a really good example of a really streamlined process where there's a lot of management actions. This one's in John's region. There's a lot of management actions, but they really kept it concise, and it's complicated, but it's not. And so I think they did this like great job at being efficient. And then there's, you know, the Flathead, which isn't quite finished yet. And they've done some really great things, including some user capacity analysis and writing of desired conditions. And so that's kind of where we're at, is if you were to say, I want the one, I would give you 5, and I'd say, here's all the great components. And if you said, I want one that's got a really great capacity analysis, I'd say, oh, great, here's a couple of those.
Can I follow up with you after this and get those?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put my
Thank you.
email in the chat.
Great question, Ben. Any other questions? If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. You can also just take this time to unmute yourself and ask out loud.
I'm putting my email in the chat. Anyone's feel free to reach out to me if they would like as well.
Well, next we're just gonna go into kind of a short activity. Yay. And think about how this all kind of applies to us, but then take it like even a step further. So this is, you know, like to jot down on a piece of paper in front of you, your notebook, a blank Word document, wherever you want to do it. And to think about, you know, maybe just start with one ORV from a river that you care about, are interested in, work with, any or all of the above. And then start by thinking back and see if you know some of the answers to these questions, like when was the ORV identified? Maybe it's a plan that just recently came out, but maybe it was a plan that came out in the 70s. Who identified it? That could be also telling of something about the ORV. And then start to think about how has this ORV changed over the last 10 years? And going even further back, how has it changed over the last 50 years? Some of our oldest wild and scenic rivers are just over 50 years old, but still these rivers are much older than that. What about the last 100 years? And then challenge you all to start thinking forward in time and start thinking about what are some future conditions or threats to the ORV, the outstandingly remarkable value, about 10 years into the future. Again, 50 years into the future, 100 years into the future. Curious if any of the people who were identifying ORVs in the 70s were thinking about 100 years into the future or 50 years into the future. And then, make some notes about some desired future conditions and possible stewardship enhancements that could be considered for each of these timeframes for this ORV. And I would love to hear, I was going to go into breakout group, but I think I'm just going to keep us here all discussing because I think there's a lot of great ideas to share. And I'm curious if any big ideas have come up. I'd also love to take some time to think about something that's been coming up a lot with people I'm working with, or like wildfires here in Oregon. And what happens if your river has a designated ORV and then a wildfire comes through and wipes it out? How do you manage to protect and enhance that, or what do you do then? And I think there's some I don't necessarily have the answer for you, but I think this could be a time where we can share ideas and what's going on, because I think that's a big topic that's been coming up for some people. So would love to hear any thoughts. Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
Let me put my hand down here. We were designated in 1992 out here in New Jersey in the outer coastal plain. And one of the ORVs that was significant was anadromous fish runs, and particularly river herring. So those were put in as an ORV, and there were runs, and they were very abundant. You could see them, and people enjoyed that, and they would fish the river herring runs. And by around 2000, the river herring disappeared. They just weren't running. People didn't see them anymore, and nothing in the river had changed. So there was no change in the habitats. There was still plenty of good river herring breeding places around, but the river herring just disappeared. And eventually by 2012, the state of New Jersey officially closed fishing for river herring in New Jersey. And you right now you can't even possess a river herring in New Jersey. So we're watching the river herring disappear. It was an ORV. So what are we going to do? What happened? So we did a lot of research, and we determined that the midwater trawling industry in the ocean significantly increased their effort in the mid-90s. And we're really catching a lot of fish in the ocean. And that depleted the river herring. And so I got involved with the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council and other fishery management folks to try to fix that. And it was really complicated. And the only thing that we were able to do was try to limit bycatch of river herring, because it's in trouble. It was a species of concern federally for many years, since about 2006. So we're just trying to reduce the number of river herring that get removed in the ocean by commercial fishing. And some of them are starting to come back, but it's an ongoing effort. And it's really can be frustrating when you lose an ORV and you didn't, it wasn't your fault.
That's really interesting. When did you take it to the Fisheries Council?
I think it was around 2002. And I'll elaborate more. I don't want to hog the time, but so in going to the fishery councils, I met other larger environmental groups. So the Great Harbor Watershed Association is just this dinky little nonprofit with a sole mission of implementing the management plan for the Great Egg. So I met people from like Earth Justice and NRDC. And after getting to know them for a while, we were invited by NRDC to be a co-plaintiff on a petition to list the river herring under the Endangered Species Act. And they asked us to participate because we could make a case that we were harmed because the river herring were this ORV for our wild and scenic river, and they disappeared. So that we could say that was like not good for us trying to protect our river for that ORV when they disappeared. So we did that for a couple of rounds with the National Marine Fisheries Service, and we were ultimately unsuccessful in getting river herring listed under the Endangered Species Act, but it caused a lot of focus and concern and study on the issue, which has proved to be beneficial over time to the fishery managers.
Interesting. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? Any ORVs that you might have thought of and desired future conditions or some stewardship actions, or maybe it's something that you're working on implementing? Maybe they've already been identified, desired future conditions. I'd love to hear some more examples. I see Kai just posted in the chat, conservation concerns and human management actions associated with the fishery scenery and recreational values can be traced at least back to the early 1900s on the Rogue River in Southwest Oregon, an instant river under the Act. Understanding the social and ecological context of this term, river values, can span generations. I don't know if you want to elaborate any more on that, Kai.
Hey, Angie. Yeah, I think it's just an important consideration. Like for me on the Rogue here and trying to understand river values and how we protect and enhance them, manage them under the requirements of the Act, regularly sends me back to old documents that go back even into like the early 1900s to kind of understand some of the history of the concerns and management that took place. It just provides that historical context for things that were going on prior to designation.
Great point. Anyone else, or what about just some general questions that might have come up about values or values that you're working with on your river? Now's the time to ask. Curious about some stewardship enhancements that people might have thought of, or maybe you're just like totally drawing a blank. That'd be interesting to know too, because then it's like, hey, let's brainstorm together or share some ideas. I know at least some people in the Forest Service have been doing some climate adaptation workshops and thinking about wild and scenic rivers and other things in the context of climate adaptation. If there's any good stewardship enhancements coming from that. Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, I have a question for John. When you were presenting on the other category, you mentioned climate refugia in that, and I think that's kind of a new concept. So how did that get included in your presentation?
Good question. And Liz, be prepared with a backup answer if I'm way off base here. I think in the fact that, you know, when you think about wild and scenic rivers, you think of these intact corridors, I suppose, of these little, you know, of river ecosystems, including, you know, a river resource that is very dependent on climate. And using that as probably like a baseline for research to understand how climate may be impacting it, and if these are areas that maybe aren't being impacted as much because of the river resources that are there, and they might have some more resiliency to some of the other changes because of their, you know, because they're riparian type zones, that type of stuff. That's how I interpreted that briefly as I would read that, because I know we've talked about rivers in relation to climate change and what their value is and what their value for research is. But that's how I kind of interpreted it.
Yeah, I can give a little bit of context on the background of that. So on the Flathead, we were doing kind of a kickoff meeting, and one of the Rivers Coalition had sent in some comments during their forest plan revision that said, okay, well, now that East Rosebud is, oh, I'm sorry, I said Flathead, on the Custer Gallatin. Now that East Rosebud is a designated river, what do you think about this idea of a climate refugia as an ORV? And so through this workshop with the forest, we kind of discussed like, well, if there was ever a place to have a climate refugia, it would likely be, you know, on East Rosebud. I don't know if many of you have been there, but it's gorgeous, and there's lots of, you know, glaciers and whatnot. So, you know, through discussions, we actually kind of decided that that wasn't the best fit, but it definitely opened up this idea of, you know, should we be looking at climate refugia on other rivers? And I think there's kind of two camps here, and one is yes, yes, we should. And the other is, well, yes, but it's already kind of inherently, or not inherently, but it could much easier, like it would fit better in like an ecology type of ORV. So that's kind of the two trains of thought right now on the climate refugia ORV. And I haven't seen anyone in the Forest Service anyway actually propose to have a climate ORV. But I don't, I think it's probably pretty likely in the future.
Hey, thanks for that answer. I think you're on the edge of the future there. So I'm glad to hear that.
Another really interesting ORV that we've been talking about is dark skies. So I'd be interested to hear what you all think about that. Is it river related?
I had another quick question, not related to what you just asked, Liz. But could someone talk a little bit to how the facilitation process of how you go about taking the staff or people that are associated with the river and developing those ORVs? Are people sitting around a table and, you know, we've got whiteboards out and writing those down, or are people just, you know, doing some creative writing sessions? What does that process look like?
I'll start with my one direct experience with, I guess I won't say this was during a CRMP development, so the river plan development, where there was already ORVs there, but they were looking to, I guess, confirm, review, expand, change potentially, because this river was designated, I believe, in the 80s and never had a plan put together for it. So, and the legislation didn't have a whole lot. I think they went through a basic planning process once it was developed, but you kind of hit it on the head with the one that I went through, which was we had local subject matter experts that worked on the district and the forest. We had some good facilitators. And yeah, it's pen and papers, it's maps, it's long discussions, it is consulting with state agencies, for example, when it comes to fish and wildlife or water. I'll go to that one little caveat on, I don't think I had it actually on the slide, which was more is better. So it's just gather to help inform those decisions. The flip side, which I have never done before, which Liz has probably done many times, is through a forest plan revision or similar for the DOI agencies, where it's, I guess, kind of the same. Local subject matter experts, maps, history, all those types of things go into making those determinations.
Agree, John.
Good question, Ben. For some of us who've not spent time directly working on it in the government, and it is the coming together of all this interdisciplinary team. I've seen it where, the botanists all get together and look at their area and see what's important, then come back and like present that to the group, and the geologist takes a turn, and the archaeologist or historic preservation officer, or there's just depending on the river, and then kind of make the case of why or why not. And again, keeping with that, like, is it river related? Is it unique? And then what is unique, rare, or exemplary? And then what is that region of comparison? And again, just to hammer down on a point that John made earlier, is each value ORV can have a different region of comparison. If so your geology might look at the whole Colorado Plateau, while your cultural ORV might look at like, I don't know, a specific culture within that plateau or something like that. I think that's an important one. It's not just like the same predefined area for every value.
One interesting thing we're kind of thinking about right now in terms of this conversation is with these big new legislation packages coming through, like the River Democracy Act, where we're looking at 5,000 miles of proposed rivers in the same area. Is how do we look at river values in that context? How do you group rivers together and go through river values reports that way and analysis that way? Do you do them separately? If you were to group them, or if you were to do them separately, how would the region of comparison look? How would you kind of separate what's unique and exemplary when you've got multiple rivers in, some cases like one watershed being proposed for designation? So I think that is going to challenge, natural resource specialists and land managers if that were to pass. And also, other states are also like following suit from the River Democracy Act. So it's not just in Oregon, but I think we're going to start seeing like multiple rivers being designated at one time instead of like the classic historical, maybe one or two.
Yeah, that's a great point to highlight. Just I've seen some maps, and when there's so many, possible river designations in one area, and then it's like, yeah, how are they all different? It's every single river in this entire little valley. So like looking at it on a watershed scale, or what that's going to look like in the future.
Yeah, we've been talking about how like this system as a whole is important. And so, I don't know, it's pretty interesting to me.
I did see Monica mentioned that the state park system in Oregon has a dark skies parks and they are gaining a lot of momentum. And yeah, wondering how dark skies, how to tie dark skies to the river and night scenery. Oh, that's an interesting idea. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that more, Monica, or if anyone has any other ideas or questions about dark skies.
Well, that was just in response to the comment about dark skies, which I just thought it was kind of neat because yeah, it's gaining a lot of momentum and it is unique and exemplary to find dark skies anymore. So I'm curious going through the exercise if that would qualify as an ORV or not. And then how far you can, I guess you can use the region of comparison to sort of help fit the mold if you want to. But yeah, I was just trying to think out loud.
Mhm.
I think it fits, not always, not everywhere, like anything else, right? But I think I've thought about this quite a bit, actually. So I think the best example is related to geology of the river. So to tie it to being river related, like think about the Grand Canyon, right? Like it's the river itself that makes that place so wild and hard to access. And so in doing so, it limits light intrusions from development and, houses and that kind of thing. And so there are actually several examples. There's these, we did this whole mapping exercise to look at where the darkest places in the US are, and then overlay wild and scenic rivers with them. And there's several examples of where river corridors are some of the darkest places. And in each time it's really steep gorges that make it really difficult for any kind of, infrastructure or building. And they're both in the East Coast and the West Coast.
There's nothing more striking than the memory of looking up at the night sky on the Grand Canyon. So yeah, that's pretty neat.
Well, we just have a couple more minutes left. So I just want to thank everyone for the conversation today. Thank you, John and Liz, for helping facilitate and share with us some information, and for all of you for asking questions. Again, this is for you all, and I know we've got some like basic ideas, but my idea is to just continue like going deeper and deeper into these conversations, but making sure that we're all on like the same page and have the same lingo and things like that before we do so. Just as a reminder, our next session is going to be in April on the 19th. Same time, we're going to be looking at Section 7 of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Excuse me. And hope to see you there. So thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. That was a very good presentation.